I think this understanding of needing to forgive it breaks down in one of three ways. We have to forgive others, whereas if someone else has been at fault or maybe been the instigator of seeing your dream die, we got to forgive others. We got to forgive ourselves, because whether or not we sabotaged our own dream or whether or not somebody else instigated it, oftentimes there's something in there that we wish we would have done, could have done, or we think we should have done differently. So we got to forgive ourselves. And then this is the tricky one that we probably don't say out loud that much, and I think it's important that we do. We got to forgive God. Hey guys, welcome back to the Daron Earlewine Podcast. So honored that you've downloaded the episode. We're going into week 3 of the Resurrection of Purpose series, and I am so excited about this series. I've loved the past 2 episodes. I love the feedback that I've been getting from you guys, the way that the series has been impacting you, and I really believe that some of the stuff that we're talking about here, applied to your life, will lead you to your next step of seeing God's purposes in your life resurrected. And I just love that we're getting to talk about this. I'm pinching myself all the time that this is what we're doing, and the fact that it's corresponding with the release of the book. And listen, we asked you guys to start pre-ordering the book. It's such an important thing for the book launch. I want to say thank you to those of you who did that. And we are giving away free autographed copies of the book. You guys crushed it, right? Thank you. But then we're talking, all right, what can we do? Just up the ante a little bit. Maybe get some more people involved. Here's the new deal, okay? For this week only, if we get an email from you this week when this podcast episode releases, if you pre-order the book and send us a picture, proof of purchase, right? Email julie@blackbirdmission.com. Once again, julie@blackbirdmission.com. This week, with a picture screenshot of you pre-ordering the book on barnesandnoble.com, we're going to give you 3 months access to Spiritual DNA for free. All right, that's a $97 value, just so you do the math real quick. You buy the book, pre-order it, all right, and we're going to give you a $97 value. You're going to get Spiritual DNA for free for 3 months for the first 10 people. From this episode that respond with the screenshot of pre-ordering the book. That's what we're going to do. Excited to get you guys involved, and it's going to be great. So let's jump in. Let's jump in to the content this week. We're into week 3. And before we do that, I also want to say just a big shout out to Darren Cooper, our producer, does all the podcast stuff. I've been watching these past couple episodes, the editing, everything. He's just doing a killer job. And I'm so stoked for the team that we work with here at Blackbird Mission. So I hope you're enjoying these podcast episodes as much as we're enjoying creating them for you. So we're going to get into this next topic, guys. And I'll just be honest, this one is tough. And if I'm really honest, this whole deal is really tough. There's not, steps in this process that it's like, oh, that's the easy one. This is just elementary. Like, it's no big deal. Because like I said in episode 1 of this series, this is tough work. This is soul work. This is heart work. This is work that I think is impossible to do without the grace and the peace and the presence of God in your life. And this step of resurrecting purpose is absolutely Jesus-centered. Because here's what it is. The next step to resurrect the purpose that God has for your life after you experience the death of a dream is this. You have to forgive it. There it is. You got to forgive it. And the faith piece, right? Believing that God could be there and do it with you, the mourning it, all of these difficult. But when you get to this step of needing to forgive what has happened, I think it's one of the most difficult ones, because I feel like the sense of, even if it's not necessarily blatant unforgiveness, but the idea of just holding on to the pain, holding on to the offense, it's deceptive because it makes us feel like maybe we're still in control. And that's a fallacy. It's not true. And I think this understanding of needing to forgive it breaks down in one of 3 ways. And actually, in most deaths of a dream, it probably almost always, I'm going to say, has all three involved. And they're this: we have to forgive others, whereas if someone else has been at fault or maybe been the instigator of seeing your dream die, we got to forgive others. We got to forgive ourselves, because whether or not we sabotaged our own dream or whether or not somebody else instigated it, oftentimes there's something in there that we wish we would have done, could have done, or we think we should have done differently. So we got to forgive ourselves. And then this is the tricky one that we probably don't say out loud that much, and I think it's important that we do. We got to forgive God. And in that one, it's not that he's done wrong, but it's that oftentimes we feel like he has. And we just have to be honest with that emotion, that if I'm going to get to the place of understanding and trusting the heart of God for the future he's going to lead me into, there's times I'm going to have to get honest and say, God, like, I have to forgive you for what happened. Not that he was that wrong, but you have to be honest about wrestling through the tension that you have with him. And so we have to forgive it. And I'm going to walk you through some steps here. I think this is really good stuff. It's throughout the book. It's throughout the Bible. And we start the chapter off with verse 9 from the Beatitudes, where it says this: you're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete and fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. If you're going to be able to show people how to cooperate instead of compete and fight, you are going to be a dealer in forgiveness. Because without forgiveness, we're always going to compete. We're always going to fight. There's always going to be conflict. And forgiveness is going to be the key that leads us through that. And page 129 of the book, I say this: one of the greatest obstacles to maturing into the weight of our calling is forgiveness. I remember a story in the New Testament, and I wasn't able to put it in the book, but I wanted to just give it to you now as maybe something extra to read this week. But it comes out of Matthew chapter 18, where Jesus is talking about this concept of forgiveness. And he begins unwrapping, talking about forgiveness. And it's, the idea of how many times do you forgive somebody? And it's interesting because Peter comes to Jesus after Jesus did this teaching, right? And Peter says, hey, how many times do I have to forgive my fellow believer who keeps forgiving me? 7 times? And in their culture, right, 7 would have been the perfect number. It would have been a number that was corresponding to God. So I think when Peter says 7 times, like, he's really going over the top, right? He thinks he's probably guessed this one correctly. See, Jesus, I really am as smart as I think I am. And he's definitely upping the ante, like 2 or 3 times, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 7 times. Like, Peter, for sure, thinks he's going to the edge of the page here. And Jesus says, not 70 times, Peter, but 70 times 7 times. This understanding that Jesus is saying, listen, really forgiveness becomes limitless. And here is why. As Jesus goes, he then breaks on a story for him of the unmerciful servant, where he talks about there was this servant, right, that owed his master, tons and tons of money, let's say millions of dollars. And he comes and he begs for mercy, and the master forgives him. And then as the story goes, he leaves and runs into one of his fellow servants that owed him like $20. And it says he grabs him by the neck and he starts choking him, and he's like, pay me what you owe me. And then Jesus says, as he ends the story, he says, when the associates saw what was going on, they were outraged and went to the king and told him the whole story. The king said to him, you scoundrel, is this the way you respond to my mercy? Because you begged me, I forgave you the massive debt that you owed me. Why didn't you show the same mercy to your fellow servant that I showed you? In a fury of anger, the king turned him over to the prison guards to be tortured until all his debt was repaid. In this same way, my heavenly Father will deal with any of you if you do not release forgiveness from your heart towards your fellow believer. I remember as a kid hearing this passage taught, and the image that stood out to me at that point was this idea that when we don't model the forgiveness that we've received and extend and forgive as completely and wholly as we've been forgiven, This understanding that he was turned over to prison guards to be tortured until the debt was repaid. I remember as a kid hearing someone preach this sermon and talk about that is what happens when we're caught in a place of unforgiveness that leads us to bitterness, to anger, and to tons of different negative attributes that we don't want in our life. We've basically chained ourselves into a prison of the offense that needs to be forgiven. That we think that we're chaining the person that hurt us in this. I'm not going to forgive you. You're in prison. You're going to deal with what you did. Here's the deal. Most of the time, they forgot about it. They've moved on. But when we don't forgive, we chain ourselves into the prison of bitterness and of anger and of pain. And if we're ever going to see the purpose that God has created us for resurrected, we cannot put ourselves in that prison cell. We have to take on the attitude and the heart of Christ and forgive it. That's where true freedom comes from. And as we get back into the thoughts here, here's one of the things that I unpack in the book, and I hope this hits you, is this phrase that I forgive them still. Because I don't know about you, but there's a lot of times where I've had someone hurt me, I've hurt myself, and I get to a place where I can forgive. Like, you know what? I need to forgive. I forgive them, right? On Monday. And then Tuesday you wake up and you think about them again, and you think about the pain, you think about the anger, you think about what they've done, you see them at Kroger or whatever it is, right? And boom, here comes all the emotions of anger, and then you have to remind yourself, whoa, I forgive them still. And if you're caught in that spin cycle, I want to encourage you this. You may need to forgive someone for every day for a couple of years before your heart catches up to what your head and your spirit have decided to do. And that's okay, right? You're in process. So if your emotions, right, here's the deal. I remember John Maxwell talking about this, that we have, our life is driven by facts. If there's think about a little engine that could, right? We've got facts, and the fact is that we're going to choose to forgive because Christ has forgiven us. We're going to believe in faith that forgiving, right? The next car on the train is faith, right? We act on facts. The faith comes in, and by faith, I'm going to believe that by forgiving them, that I've released this, that I'm now in union with God, what wants me to do, and His Spirit's going to work through me. I have faith in that. And then the caboose on this thing is feelings. And sometimes, guys, there's some like empty carts, and like the caboose chain of your feeling is like a mile down the road. And you say, here's the facts. I've chosen to forgive them. I believe in faith. This is the right thing to do. But I am waiting. I am waiting for the caboose of feelings to show up. That's okay, because your feelings, right? Great companions, terrible leaders in your life. Sometimes we have to act, actually no, all times we have to act on faith and on facts and forgive it. And sometimes it takes a while to do that. In the book, I say this: it's so much easier to wallow in self-pity and anger, blaming the person who hurt you, than it is to trust the unbeaten path of forgiving those who have hurt you. If you're not careful, you will find yourself continually harvesting the pain of your past instead of reaping the sweet fruit of God's faithfulness. We've got to forgive it still. That process goes on, and that is where your future and your purpose is going to be found. And here's one of the things I think is difficult. In the book, as we're walking through the story of Joseph, there's this powerful moment towards the end of Joseph's, the end of the story, where he's been leading. God's restored him. Right? He's gone from being betrayed by his brothers to the pit, to the palace, to the prison. Then he gets restored, and he's overseeing everything in Egypt. And his brothers show up, and he actually has this moment, right, where he remembers his dream from childhood, because as he's there, they come, they're begging for food because there's this famine, and they don't recognize him. They don't know who he is. He's in this amazing moment where he could get total revenge from his brothers. They don't know who he is. He knows who they are. He's in power. He's in control. And here they are, and they bow down to him. And the Word of God says that Joseph remembered his dream. And this is a defining, pivotal moment for Joseph. And when you have these moments, they're defining moments for you. And I promise you, you have some kind of triggering moment, memory, environment, person, whatever it is, that makes you remember your dream. And when you have that, you begin to wrestle with, this is not the way my life was supposed to be, right? this is not what it was supposed to be. What if this, what if this? And when we have these remember our dream moments, we have to come back to the reality and the facts of the faith of saying, I have forgiven and I will stay in a place of forgiveness. For Joseph, he does that. He remembers his dream. I wish we could unpack all of we could someday we will sit down with him and say, Joseph, what were all the emotions that you felt during that moment? We don't know all the emotions, but we know what he did is he stayed in that place of forgiveness and loved his brothers well. He set him up. He got him food, the whole thing. It's a beautiful story. And what happened, because he stayed in a spirit of forgiveness through the whole process, not only were his dreams realized, but God's purposes through his life were resurrected and his family dynamics were redeemed. His relationships were redeemed. The people of God were redeemed. Had Joseph not chosen to forgive it again in this moment when he remembered his dream as his brothers are bowing down before him, who knows what would have been the damage done to God's people, to Joseph, to his family line. For me, I tell a story in the book, and this is just funny, is the big thing for me, I love traveling. I love the idea of touring when we were traveling in a band, and I've always dreamed of someday getting to tour on a tour bus. And here in our offices, we're next to this nice hotel down the way over here, and we can see the parking lots. And during the summer, when bands are on tour, a couple days a week, there are like 3 or 4 nice, beautiful, awesome tour buses parked out there. And I actually have some binoculars. This is the weird thing, but I have binoculars because sometimes I want to see, like, do we know one of the bands that are down there? It's like, for me, the remembered my dreams, triggering moments is any time I see a tour bus. In fact, I still have a deal with God. I'm like, God, you know what? I've forgiven it. You and me are great. I love the life you've given me. But at some point, if we could mix in just like maybe a week on a tour bus somewhere, like it would be complete. But that's a triggering moment for me when I see buses and I'm like, man, I should be on a bus like that. I should be on tour now. And I have to come back to the reality of this, is that we do not serve a God of what ifs. We serve a God and we're connected and loved by a God of what is. This is what it is right now. And when we embrace that, he can take us into what could be. But if we stick back in a place of unforgiveness and we just continue to rehearse the what ifs, we will not be ready to embrace the future that God has prepared for us in advance to walk into. So important. And so as we get into this part, how do we do it? Well, first and foremost, we fix our eyes on Jesus. We fix our eyes on the author and perfecter of our faith and understand that resurrection and forgiveness always go together. You look at the life of Jesus and literally his act of dying on the cross brought us forgiveness. The only innocent human being to ever live was completely unfairly betrayed, beaten, garbage trial, all these. The most unfair circumstances that any human being has ever seen is Jesus. And in this moment, he's forgiving those that are hurting, and he's purchasing the forgiveness for all of humanity. There is never resurrection without forgiveness. We have to allow Jesus to be our example on this and fix our eyes upon him, because forgiveness is the pathway into what is and what could be. Here's a passage of scripture I want to hit you with that gives us the context for this, right? Ephesians chapter 4, 30 through 32, reading from the New Living Translation. It says this, and do not bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he has identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on the day of redemption, right? Remember, you have been forgiven, so resurrection is in your future. So because of that, here's what we need to do because of what we've received. He says this, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Think about that. Break down those words. When you are in a place of unforgiveness with others, with yourself, or with God, tell me that's not the process that happens. I remember my dreams, and I'm thinking, this is not the way it was supposed to be. Life's not fair. I'm still sad about it. What if this could have happened? What if this could have been different? And then like bitterness, right? Bitterness then leads to rage. I'm so angry about what's going on. Then anger kicks in. Then harsh words. So if I'm speaking to you or about you, harshness comes out. Then slander, right? After you're mad, you're angry, you're at rage, and you're saying terrible things about somebody, then somebody comes and asks you about the person that hurt you or whatever it is, and you slander them. They're the worst. I hope they die. I mean, whatever it could be. We've all said terrible things because we're in that process, as well as all types of evil behavior, which then is the next fruit of the harvest of bitterness in our life. This is not the life that God has for you. This is not a life that is going to allow you to enjoy and receive the resurrection of your purpose. You got to forgive it. Then Paul hits us with this last verse. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. You know, I think the process here goes, you kind of almost see it as an infinity loop. Is what happens is we receive great grace from God, which leads us to forgiveness. And in the book, I talk about this, and it's a powerful thing that was taught to me a few years ago, is that I love the fact that grace, right, it means the unearned, unmerited favor and forgiveness of God. But the word is also very, almost better or equally understood as presence. Yes, God's grace is sufficient to forgive, but God's grace sustains because it is God's grace that leads us into God's presence. Grace is presence. And so when we're trying to forgive it, we have to remember, okay, let's see here. God, right? I have forgiveness from God by grace. That grace of forgiveness leads me back up to a place of understanding and being able to experience the joy of his presence, and living in the joy and the power of his presence brings me down to actually, I've received grace from God. I'm in his presence. Now I can move down and begin to extend grace for others, from God for others. And when I can extend grace for others, what happens is I enjoy the presence of others, and they enjoy my presence. Then my life is blessed. And what is my life? Thank you, Gary Smalley. My life is relationships, and everything else is just the details. If you're stuck right now, you're like, Daron, I can't let it go. Here's what I want you to do your best to do, is begin focusing your attention on the grace and the love and the forgiveness you've received from God. Say, God, would you overwhelm me with your level of forgiveness, of your level of grace, of your level of patience, and overwhelm me with gratitude for the forgiveness that I have received, so that your grace and forgiveness can be sufficient to help me enjoy your presence, so that I can then extend your grace and your presence for others in my life. It's a big step, guys, and I know it's difficult, and it might need to happen every day for a year until you're at the place where you can remember your dreams and look back on them like we talked about in the last episode. You've mourned them, you've celebrated them, you've let them die, and now you're ready for the resurrection. Until you're at that point, choose the facts that God has forgiven you. You can forgive others. Believe that in faith. And then someday soon, I promise you, that caboose of feelings will show up, and you'll be able to stand in the peace and the joy of being able to release the debt that others owed you or that you owed you. It's the next step. It's a tough one. I believe in you. You can do it. Thanks for tuning in, guys, for this episode. I appreciate it. Please share this episode with people that you feel like it would be helpful to them. Would love, love, love for you to subscribe to whether it be the YouTube channel or Spotify or wherever you get your downloads for your podcast. And we can't wait to get some emails from you guys from pre-ordering the book so we can give you free access. First 10 people, free access to 3 months of spiritual DNA. You guys have an amazing week. We'll talk to you next time here on the Daron Earlewine Podcast. And until we do, these 3 things. God is for you, not against you. He's near you, not far from you. He's created you on purpose and for a purpose. We'll talk to you next time.